The talk before Liverpool against Chelsea was that Cole Palmer was the best player in the league. Yeah, how did that go? Don't think it went well. Anyway, I think it's worth discussing why he sort of landed at this pedestal. Kweku said on a separate video in the Liverpool Arsenal preview that assist that Salah did for Curtis Jones, if Palmer did that, we'd be talking about that non-stop. What happened against Liverpool? Let's quickly work our way through that, and then let's work towards whether he is the best player in the league.
Well, I think in the Liverpool game, he was marked out of the game. I think Curtis Jones was tasked with keeping an eye on Cole Palmer. He did a very good job of that. That's not to denigrate or criticise Cole Palmer. He's still a very good player, but I feel like the mark of a great player is when everybody knows what you're going to do and you can still do it anyway. Everyone always knows what Mo Salah's going to do. He can still do it anyway. People know what Bukayo Saka's going to do. He can do it anyway. And Cole Palmer's had an incredible season last year, but he was the new kid on the block. People weren't game planning for Cole Palmer. Now, with all the noise surrounding him, people saying that he's the best player in the league, some people saying he's the best player in the world, teams now game planning for Cole Palmer. He's going to figure out a way to bypass that. But I still expect him to have a very, very good season. He's an incredible footballer, the best technical footballer I've seen at Chelsea since Eden Hazard, which says a lot because we've had a very good team since then. We've won the Champions League in those intermittent years. But Cole Palmer's a player that he needs the freedom to do what he wants to do, and not many teams afford you that luxury in the Premier League. He is afforded that by Enzo Maresca because he is that good. But I expect him to bounce back against Newcastle. I'm not on this wave of him being the best player in the league until he does it for a team that's challenging at the higher end of the league. He's doing it for a couple of seasons. I feel like longevity means something. So I will not be sat here and saying that Cole Palmer's better than Mo Salah until he proves that he actually is better than Mo Salah.
I don't think we need to say that he's better than Mo Salah. I think that's going a bit over the top. But I do feel like we're being a bit harsh on Cole Palmer because he turned up in a game that Chelsea were not the favourites for. They were the underdogs for, let's be honest. They turned up there and Liverpool did a great job, I think, of identifying the areas that Cole Palmer wants to work in and stopping the supply line in. That's what they did, and they did it brilliantly. And I think that the very best teams then have other players that will step up and impact the game more. Therefore, you're then not focusing on the star man being a little bit out of it. You're focusing on the other guy that stepped up to the mantle. And unfortunately for Chelsea, a few of these players that turned up on the day are still a little bit wet behind the ears, if we're being honest. Madueke plays well in flashes. Jadon Sancho's not the Jadon Sancho that Borussia Dortmund had. Nicholas Jackson contributed, to be fair to him. But I feel like Liverpool just did a good job, and I think that can happen to even the very best players in the world.
Yeah.
So I don't think I'm going to change my mind on where Cole Palmer is level-wise based on what happened last weekend.
He's still very, very good, and this is the conundrum for Chelsea, right? Because when they write down the formations at the beginning of the game, they're set up in the 4-2-3-1, but that's not how Chelsea is set up. Out of possessions of 4-4-2, Cole Palmer pushes up next to Nicholas Jackson, and that's how most teams defensively set up in the Premier League. In possession, it's a 3-2-2-3 with either a right back or left back inverting going next to Caicedo. And when Enzo starts, he pushes up as that number 10 next to Cole Palmer. And so it gives the opposition something else to think about. I think that Lavia had an incredible game. I think Caicedo was really, really good as well. But the Liverpool midfielders didn't have to think about Lavia or Caicedo defensively, where they do have to think about Enzo defensively. I prefer Caicedo and Lavia as a partnership, but going forward, it means that Cole Palmer has more of an attacking burden, and so he needs to figure that out. He will do, because last year he drifted out to the right more, and that's where he had most of the success. This season he's been a bit more central, but it's just about finding solutions. I'm not sitting here and saying Cole Palmer's a lesser player because he didn't turn up at Anfield. I've seen better players than Cole Palmer not turn up at Anfield. Lionel Messi has not turned up at Anfield. And so he just needs to figure out what he's going to do. And I think against the Newcastle team that are pretty vulnerable right now, he will have a field day.
I do think as well, just really quickly on this, if you're Cole Palmer at Anfield and you've been given a job to do tactically to keep the team in a defensive shape when you're out of possession, he might know in that situation, I'm not getting the ball here and I need to go right or I need to go left. But when you're at Anfield against that level of opposition, there's probably an instruction from the manager that says, stick to the structure. We know you're not going to get the ball. Stick to the structure. Whereas if you're playing a lesser opponent at home, he probably does take the game by the scruff of the neck and say, I'm going to go drifting to make sure that I am involved in this game. But you got to factor who they were playing against and what the wider instruction might have been.
I thought what was interesting in that game was when Enzo came on, Chelsea sort of ended up having a cluster of players in a similar area, which is, we're not going to move on from Palmer, but I did wonder whether Palmer's better suited to playing off the right and just coming inside. And like, I don't mind him in central areas against teams lower in the table. Like this Newcastle game might suit him a lot, but then I look at the Newcastle midfielder and go, Joe Linton will do a job on him. We'll just chase him around for 90 minutes. When you play a player off the right-hand side, they're just harder to track because the left-back will wander sometimes, then you can drift wide. Sometimes the left-back comes inside, you can hang wide. Left-back goes on, you come inside. There's just lots more options. When you're in a central area, there's not many places you can go.
I don't disagree with that. I think you're actually right. I've not really thought about that. But if you put Palmer on the right-hand side, obviously you drop Madueke and you play in Kunku where Cole Palmer plays, I think you give Liverpool a lot more problems and a lot more things to think about, which is, I think we saw Cole Palmer last year against big teams in the league, apart from Liverpool, have a field day playing off that right-hand side and then drifting into centre. So I think that might be a solution.
It's an interesting conversation because I think Foden is having sort of had that issue as well where because he was playing wider, they were asking more of him in wide areas. But I think the game's changed so much now that your right-sided attacker isn't even really a right-sided attacker. They can come inside whenever they want. They can hang wide. Enzo's an interesting one. I had a feeling you'd mention him. What are Chelsea doing with him? Because Lavia and Caicedo, I thought looked really good against Liverpool. It's interesting you say that if Enzo goes and plays higher, you have more things to think about as a defensive side. But I think when he plays higher and he gets the ball, it doesn't suit him in those areas. And this is what, an £80 million midfielder? That's
100
million. I'm trying to be nice to him. £100 million midfielder who doesn't really have a home.
It's a hard one with him because obviously he had all the off-the-field stuff, right, which didn't help in his preparation for this season. There was already a load of pressure on him going into this season because when he was absent, Chelsea seemed to do better under Mauricio Pochettino. That's what the facts tell us, the stats tell us, etc., etc. But sometimes we look at players and we look at their talent level and we go, he's got to be playing. But actually, for a manager, it's about balance first and foremost. And I just don't think he gives them the right balance. I don't watch him as much as Kweku does. He'll be able to answer this much better than me. But I don't know where I would want to use Enzo. Do I want him deep, getting on the ball, pulling the strings in like a Jorginho-style role? Do I want him as an 8, getting up and down? Do I want him a little bit more advanced in that so he's got less defensive responsibility? I can't put my finger on where he fits. And I think with Maresca, there's a clear identity around what those three midfielders need to look like. And I just don't think he fits in that right now.
I love the fact that you brought up Jorginho because with Enzo Fernandez, my biggest issue with him is the lack of physicality, right? But he's still very, very young. And with Jorginho at Chelsea and at Arsenal, you can accept it because he's a tempo setter. He dictates the tempo of a game. Enzo can't do that. I don't know. He might be able to develop that. He's still very young, but he can't do that yet. Is he a marauding number 8? No, he hasn't got the physicality to do it. Is he a number 10? No, he hasn't got the deftness around the box to do it. And so I just don't know what he is. I don't know how he fits in. And I do think Chelsea are a better side without him in it. And it's difficult, right? Because he did have the off-the-field issues, and I think that's kind of tarnished him for a lot of Chelsea fans. But when I look at centre midfielders, I need to see a standout attribute, and he doesn't have any of them. He's not an incredible passer either.
I thought when he played for Argentina, the one thing they did really well, which I think you do have the potential of doing, is they had Rodrigo de Paul next to him, who seems to babysit everyone, to be honest, in that team. But when you have this midfielder who essentially sacrifices all of his technical attributes and says, I will run for whoever needs me running, it allowed Enzo to just have more freedom and more space. But then Argentina are a really unique international side. International football is completely different. Another very quick topic I wanted to talk about is obviously the opposition, Newcastle. I remember when Eddie Howe first took over Newcastle St James's Park, there was a feeling. Now I do feel like when Newcastle are on, that's a terrible way to look at it, but when Newcastle are on television on a Sunday, I'm not locked in. I'm not desperate to sit down and go, something could happen here. And I think, in my opinion anyway, I think they've just become a little bit boring, a little bit stale. Now, like the counter-attack style that they're trying to implement just feels like a cop-out from what they could actually do.